Hi, this is State Delegate Mark Corman, and from Wisconsin Avenue in District 16 to Pratt Street in Baltimore to the Boardwalk on the Eastern Shore and everywhere in between, Conduit Street Podcast is the go-to source for news about Maryland politics and policy.
Hello and welcome to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, we are at 169 Conduit today. It's good to see you. I thought you were only going to come down on the really nice days, and today it's raining, so I guess I was wrong about that, but hopefully you got some karaoke in. I think that's when we last were here. You were heading out to do karaoke. So.
All right. So, yeah, we got all this crazy feedback that we were trying to, tongue firmly planted in cheek, talk about COVID's canceled, the party's on, and that sort of stuff. And I don't know, maybe a fully half of the comments we got back from listeners were saying, I hope you guys are safe. Please don't be dumb. Please wear your masks. No, we're fine. We're being smart. Everything's okay. But it is nice to be back in town, back on Conduit Street. And, we set a trap out in front of the Conduit Street offices hoping we could find a guest speaker to join us for this episode. And man, we hit it hard.
We found a great guest today, friend of the podcast, Chris Trumbauer, a man of many roles, and he has just elevated into a new role, and we'll talk some about that. But Chris, thank you so much for being with us today. Of course, Arundel County's budget officer. Welcome to the podcast.
Sure. Happy to be here. I was just walking down the street. It started raining. I ducked in here to try and get some shelter, and now I'm on a radio.
He was looking for an umbrella, you know, but I hope you enjoyed the green room. You have your snacks.
Yeah, it's good. What's with all the Guam posters in there?
That's what we do. We get you set up, we get you ready, because that's mostly what this podcast is about. A little Maryland politics, a little policy, a lot of Guam.
Cool. All right. I'm into it.
All right. So, Chris, we want to hear about your journey into becoming Anne Arundel County's budget officer. And you've been around Annapolis politics, the scene, for a long time. Talk a little bit about your current role and how you got there.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for making me feel old, Kevin. Appreciate that. But so I guess I came to know MACo because I was a council member for 2 terms in Anne Arundel, enjoyed being part of the legislative committee. And, I kind of ran for office largely on an environmental platform, and that was my whole thing. But throughout the course of my legislative career, I somehow turned into a budget wonk and spent a lot of time in the auditor's office and working with, John Hammond in the county budget office. And so it's always been something I've enjoyed because you think about it, budget's a giant policy vehicle, right? I mean, if you want to do something, you got to pay for it, and budget makes it happen. So when County Executive Pittman was elected in Anne Arundel, he brought me on board, and I was kind of a, communications and policy guy, and did a lot of stuff with the budget. But then as things go, there was a vacancy in the budget officer, and you got to appoint an acting person, right? And so they looked around and they're like, all right, let's throw Trumbauer over there. So I did that for a couple months, and turned out, I guess, it was a good fit because county exec made me permanent earlier this year, back in January. And I'm really lucky because I have a great team of, we call them budgeteers, and a few other people sprinkled throughout county government that have previously been in the budget office. But it's been going pretty well. And I'll say this is a very interesting time to be involved in a county budget office. There's a lot going on.
Right. That really is like the arcing theme of why we wanted to bring you aboard. And jokes aside about this being just sort of a random lasso, we felt like this was a good window of time to talk about the budgeting process. The state budget is starting to come into crisper focus. We're recording on Wednesday afternoon, and just earlier today, we heard some details about what the state has in mind longer term with federal funds. And all this uncertainty at the state level precedes what tends to be the counties going through a very similar process. You need to know where you sit with the state and state policies and requirements and so forth. But you and your colleagues who are trying to figure out county level fiscal plans are in high gear right now, meeting with your agencies on, what you can pull together for at least the first draft of a county budget.
That's right. And I'll say it's been a very dynamic year. So things look a lot different now, right, almost in April than they did back in January, for instance, which is when we started trying to build our operating budget. And it's always an interesting time of year because at the same time counties are building their budgets, our friends over over in the General Assembly are working on the state budget, and that obviously has implications, good and bad. But some of our peers have already submitted their budget, right? And then the state budget isn't even done yet.
Right.
So I know Montgomery County submitted theirs, and I think there's a couple others. We don't submit ours till April 30th, so we have another few weeks left to try and prognosticate about what's going to happen and fit the last minute comings and goings in there. But there is a bunch of moving parts. There's the federal assistance, first with CARES, and now with the American Rescue Plan, which we call ARPA. I don't know if anyone else does that.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think that
ARPA's
I think that may be showing up as the preferred pronunciation
it's
among
a hashtag
the
too,
types.
so I think you're good. Yeah.
Okay.
It sounds a little like DARPA. It sounds to me like a little like
it's a little sinister. It does sound a little sinister, but really it's all good though. It's really good stuff, and we've done a lot of talking about how we deployed CARES, which was last year, and obviously is extended to the end of the year, and then what we're going to do with ARPA. And the thing is, like, if CARES was a 5K, ARPA's a marathon, right? I mean, we've got till the end of 2024 calendar year, and there's a lot more flexibility and broad directives out of that, and there's a lot of different federal initiatives that are coming to the counties, either directly or through the state. So there's a lot hanging out there that I think everybody's trying to get a good handle on.
There's also a big infrastructure package that President Biden, I think, is unveiling today. So a lot going on that you're trying to plan for. But, you mentioned we're in much better shape, but there are still a number of things that you and your colleagues across the counties are worried about, right? I mean, talking about COVID, the numbers are starting to spike again. We still have an uncertain economy. You don't really know who's employed or who's being propped up. How do you deal with all of that as you build a budget moving forward? I mean, again, things are much better than they were before, but still a lot of uncertainty. Do you build in some flexibility, some padding there to make sure you're not in bad shape once the federal money dries up?
Right. So we don't really have the luxury of building in padding per se, but what we're kind of looking at this budget in Anne Arundel County, this is kind of a get back on track budget, right? Like last year, we submit our budget May 1st. That was when all hell was breaking loose with the economy. And we took things out. We took all the cash out of our capital budget. We restricted programs. We brought everything back that we could to the minimal. And it turned out, now we know things weren't that bad. And so we budgeted very conservatively, which was the smart thing to do. And now the revenue projections are coming back better, which means we have more funds to deploy than we thought we would. Looking forward, again, we're trying to look at the immediate future versus the long term, right? Like the next few years are going to be totally how are we bouncing back from the COVID pandemic, but what are the underlying economic indicators moving past that, right? County Executive Pittman saw in the Washington Post this really interesting graphic that showed like people's income divided in quartiles, right? And the lowest 25% are the folks that had the unemployment, that their wages went down, they tanked.
Right.
People above that were doing okay, they're very resilient, and in fact, like the highest bracket are doing even better in some cases.
Right.
And so we're kind of looking at that, saying, okay, the recovery, what can we do to make sure that we're helping the people that are needing the most help, and trying to project that out a couple years. But even with all this extra federal assistance that's coming, and now the state had a big announcement with the presiding officers and the governor today, and they've got some good news. But all of that assistance money, that's coming in. That's something that you can use for short-term things. But once it's gone, it's gone. So you can't count on that being there in a few years. So you got to be careful what you spend it on. You want to do the most good you can without setting yourself up for a big fall later on.
Right. And that difference between short-term and longer-term thinking is a recurring theme when we talk with the fiscal leaders at every level, but certainly at the county level. You've got to balance your budget every year, and so you've got to think multiple years and affordability and so forth. We don't know. I mean, the thing that I find the most mystifying here is that every economist or every consultant who's trying to give you guidance on what the economy really looks like right now, they have thrown out the playbook, right? Because usually you're looking at things like unemployment. It's a really easy indicator of, is there distress in the economy? And if people are starting to line up and claim unemployment, usually that's a really reliable indicator that there's weakness, and that means trouble. That's going to mean your wage base, and that means people buy fewer shoes and fewer sandwiches. But unemployment claims are super high, but we've papered that over with federal assistance, probably for the better.
Right.
But that means you have a massive disconnect with the usual indicators and what's really happening under the surface. So we don't know. We had close to 1 million people last week file for unemployment for the first time in America. Those are panic numbers, but the economy right now doesn't say panic.
Yeah.
So how, making a 1-year plan is tricky enough, but thinking about, well, what are we going to do in year 2 and year 5 has got to be like, it's like the Riddler,
Right.
just nothing but questions.
Well, it's unprecedented too. There's nothing like this in the modern era to go back and say, well, how did it go back then, right? Like tell me another time when you're in a recession, but the real estate market is on fire.
And if
right?
there's anyone who you could go to, it would be John Hammond. Like, he had seen it all, right? And he can't even go to a time where things have been this sort of in flux, right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, if he can't do it, there's probably nobody can.
Right.
So, I mean, the federal money's coming, but obviously, that needs local guidance. And NACo at the national level, MACo has been pushing for flexible funding, fair funding for all counties. That needs local guidance, right? And a lot of this money is just passing through, right? And we've seen that at the state level as well with some of the stuff the state has done. The counties have sort of managed those programs, and money literally just flows through. So talk a little bit about that and how you handle that as well, trying to write county budgets and managing that piece of it, and then also what you want to do as a county with a separate pot of money that's not just passing through.
Sure, and that is where it all comes down to, right? And that's what makes all of this so complex. But again, I can point to the CARES funding that we got, because Anne Arundel County got about $101 million, and that was right as we were introducing our budget last year. So we didn't include anything from CARES in our budget. It was still formulating, and we weren't sure how we could use it and what the guidance was. So we kind of pretended it didn't exist. We built our budget, and then we figured, okay, we'll use CARES the best we can. And right off the bat, we started using it to do things like buy PPE, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
To buy food for people that needed food, like all the immediate response kind of stuff. And then as time went by and things started becoming more clear and we had a better picture, then we started doing assistance programs. And these were a lot of things we did, some even in partnership with the state. So helping out the restaurant industry, or we worked with our local community foundation to give a grant for nonprofit organizations, right? Because they were struggling too.
Definitely.
And then a lot of things that we would classify as personal assistance too. So we had our accounting folks kind of break out just in a pie chart of how we spent the CARES funds, and about 30% of it to date has been on health initiatives, straight to our Department of Health to do all that stuff, and then about 14% for our first responders, because their jobs changed a lot and they were doing things. About 10% for overall county government program support, and then 20% of it went to assistance programs straight to our local businesses. About another 20% to assistance programs for residents. So we kind of spread it around a little bit. The thing is, with this new ARPA funding, the Biden bill, that's a little bit different because it's a lot more flexible and it can last a lot longer.
Right,
and so we're working now to try and plot out a more longer term strategy. And they specifically call out a few things, like they say, hey, you can use this for water and sewer infrastructure. You can use it for broadband. You can use it to try and, make a dent on poverty issues, right? And these are all things that are attractive to County Executive Pittman, and I assume to other county leaders across the state. So we're not looking at ARPA as just a COVID response bill as much as we're looking at it as a COVID response bill plus these other things. And as MACo knows, and everybody, like, counties have been asking for more assistance to do a lot of this stuff for a long time. And so this can be a vehicle to kickstart some of those efforts, but you can't get too dependent on it for long-term costs because it goes away eventually.
Right. I feel like broadband, and this is something we'll bring up as we talk about the state plan as well, but broadband is a perfect illustration of that nexus, that it's a public health crisis first and foremost, and it turns into an economic crisis, and that has its own ripple effects. But what we're finding is societally, so many people working from home, so many students trying to learn from home and relying on their internet connection as not just entertainment, not just, I want to be able to stream a movie, but I need to be able to get my class materials, or I need to be able to participate in the sales pitch for my firm. Yeah. Like, that's a totally different relationship. And that's, okay, it's not exactly COVID, but COVID sort of has illustrated where the rocky shoals are in our sort of economy, in our infrastructure, and so forth. And we've heard this term, like digital divide, has been, limping around for a decade, but I feel like we're in really high gear, recognizing this is super important. It's going to stay that way. Even hopefully we're on the backside of this tough time, and a year or two from now, we're not going to be in shutdown America, but we're going to be in a revised America where your connectivity is going to remain super important.
Yeah. So, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, remember, you weren't supposed to go to the doctor. You weren't supposed to go to other things. And so what'd you have? You had telehealth appointments, right? Well,
right.
If you don't, how are you supposed to do that if you don't have a good internet connection? So I think this has exposed like another equity issue, and it is, it's a crisis, but it also presents the opportunity to address that. So I think there's a number of things like that.
And promoting equity, it sounds like that actually is an undercurrent that the county executive, that Anne Arundel County, and I think other jurisdictions are putting forward as you put together plans for the next round of ARPA funding. Mm-hmm. We did some emergency stuff, right? We had to put people on new assignments, and we had to buy protective equipment, and we had to bail out this restaurant, or else they're going to go belly up and fire everybody, right? So that's kind of round one. If round two is, how do we try and sort out the pieces? A theme being promoting equity as we recover, thinking about renters and rental properties. I mean, that's a big part of uncertainty in our economy too. So that's one of the things that I'm hearing as you kind of go through the bits of the pie chart. Equity is a consideration that's going to be on a lot of people's minds here too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So you address the short-term needs immediately, and now moving forward, making equity a central component across multiple policy areas seems to be the county executive's vision moving forward, and what you're crafting and hearing from all your folks as they make their budget requests. That seems to be a central theme across a broad array of policy areas moving forward.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Chris, we know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much for being here. You're in the midst of all your budget considerations. I know you're on Zooms and you're talking to your departments and working all that out, but we really appreciate your time to sort of walk through somebody boots on the ground, how they've been dealing with and planning for the fiscal terms in the future, and of course, reconciling what you had to deal with COVID. So thanks so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And thanks for the cool MACo Conduit Street blog tote bag. I mean, I didn't expect this, but it's really nice.
Do you like the fancy water with the logo on it too?
Yeah, I didn't know you guys were still doing that with COVID, but I'm really pleased. So
all right,
happy to do it.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. It's really good to talk to you.
Hey, Conduit Street fans. We just got through audit season, and I bet many of your governments are sitting on a long-term liability for retiree health insurance. Many counties and cities are looking for a solution to help them save today's funds towards tomorrow's costs. MACo has created a cost-saving investment trust service for counties, libraries, community colleges, and our municipal friends as well. If you join the MACo Investment Trust, you share all the overhead costs with multiple participants, you gain access to an A-team of investment and fiscal advisors, and you benefit from a portfolio designed around your needs. For more information, click on the links in the show notes for this episode.
All right, welcome back to the Conduit Street Podcast. Kevin Kinnally back here with Michael Sanderson. Michael, on the front end, we talked with Chris Trumbauer, Anne Arundel County's budget officer, about budgeting amidst a pandemic. We talked about the federal money that's coming down. We also mentioned and teased that there was a big announcement today with the presiding officers of the General Assembly, along with the governor, on how to spend this massive amount of federal money that's going to be coming down as a result of the ARPA plan that was passed by Congress. Obviously this is something that we've been looking forward to, Michael, and I think this is a great example of how things should work here in Annapolis.
Yeah, I think we can break this down a little bit. It's been 2 or 3 weeks running now that I think we've made mention on the podcast, feeling like something like this made sense, that this should happen, right? Whether it was going to be a bill that the legislature might pass saying this should be the spending framework, or whether it apparently, like we saw, technically the term is a supplemental budget introduced today, and the announcement this afternoon that this is a spending framework for how the state of Maryland plans to put these dollars to work. Some of it really rapidly, and some of it is probably going to be over time, but doing this within the budget process is sort of like the above board way to do this. It's the most straightforward, the most transparent way to do this. And having legislative leaders, as part of the announcement, I feel was big, broad messaging, and probably tells us why this has been quiet for a while.
Right. We knew that they were sort of negotiating behind the scenes. And this, if you look at this money, and again, it's about $3.9 billion. This is stuff that the governor wants. This is stuff that the General Assembly wants. And I guess you have to give kudos to all of them involved for working this out. We knew things were quiet, like you said, for a reason. We knew there were discussions going on about how to get to a point where both the General Assembly and the governor were very satisfied in how this money would be distributed. But Michael, again, we'll go through some of these items, but I guess you really have to give kudos to the leadership, their staff, the governor, his staff, because this seems like a really good agreement. They were really happy they went out there together, like you said. Yeah. And this is a great example of how our government should work.
Right. And I mean, you look in some states, this is going to be combat. Right. In some states, you'll have the executive branch and the legislative branch in a big arm wrestling over who gets the upper hand here. Well, we want to make the rules. We're going to pass this bill. We're going to create a commission. We're going to tell you what to do. Governor will say, no, you're not, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this could have been like that, but instead it ends up being, we're going to address all of our collective priorities. And I mean, it's not like the list of things that got discussed today was lots of big twists and turns, but I think these things make sense as a Maryland response to the problems we face on the ground and what we know are coming around the bend.
Right. So we'll go through a couple of these items here, Michael. Again, some of the major components here of this bipartisan agreement. First of all, $1.1 billion, so a big chunk, is going to be designated to shoring up the state's unemployment insurance trust fund. Michael, that's in the weeds, but talk a little bit about that and why that's important.
Yeah, I don't think we want to go super deep, but short version is we have an unemployment insurance system that's designed to make people not quite whole, but closer to whole than they would be if they were just out of work and had no income. So you lose your job, we'll fill in the gap and help you have some income while you look for another job. And that system works generally pretty well under fairly ordinary circumstances. With the numbers of Marylanders who were drawing claims and filing claims and so forth, we're just outstripping this system. And left to its own devices, what you'd end up with is lots of employers laid people off through no fault of their own. Right. And they would be tagged as, oh, now you're a bad actor. And so you've used the system a lot. And like insurance, like if you have like 3 car crashes, your auto insurance rate goes up.
Rates go up.
Yeah, you'd have the same problem. So you don't want that to happen. You don't want those businesses to get swallowed up by huge premiums. But that means by not bumping up their premiums, the trust fund that actually pays people's insurance payments, that trust fund is going to go belly up.
Right.
So we basically have papered that over temporarily, and this is a way to get that program back on its feet. We're doing the right thing by Marylanders who are down on their luck. We're not trying to flood the employers who had to let people go, because this is a one-of-a-kind circumstance.
Absolutely, and it's certainly a balancing act. So good news there. That seems like a worthwhile investment. Michael, $800 million is going to go to existing efforts to provide pandemic relief, including the Relief Act of 2021. We've talked about that. The Maryland Strong Economic Recovery Initiative. More than $600 million dedicated this is a big one, Michael, to the safe reopening of schools. So this is a big topic, good chunk of money going here. That makes sense.
Right. And mostly this is common sense. We're not done with this, right? I mean, we've got vaccinations on the way, and let's hope that in a few weeks' time, the sort of troubling numbers will turn in a better direction and so forth. But even in our optimistic view of how things are going to go from here, we still have some months ahead of being safe, being smart, being at some limited capacity, and economic activity not quite back to normal. So even in the rosiest scenario, we still need help. And that's what this is. This is a recognition that we're not out of the woods yet.
Absolutely. And then $500 million, Michael, dedicated to the Maryland Department of Transportation and Transportation Authority to improve infrastructure and services. That's always a good thing. One of the big things that I think stood out, and the Senate President talked about this during this press conference, $300 million to major investments in broadband technology. Michael, there's $128 million for network infrastructure, $75 million for service fee and device subsidies. We know that's a big deal. And then municipal broadband grants as well. This is a topic we've talked about a lot. This is a MACo initiative this year to streamline deployment of broadband across the state. There are other bills that are moving that create new funds. So this is, we mentioned earlier, a big topic. I'm happy to report that our initiative bill has passed the Senate. It just got out of the House committee. It's going to be on the floor. So good news there, and really good news that the state is going to pony up $300 million out of this money to support expansion of broadband across the state. It's so vital for everyone.
Yeah, totally agreed. I mean, I think we got to this in our conversation with the budget officer, with Chris Trumbauer, talking about these are among the initiatives in one or many of our Maryland counties. This was one of these things that bubbled up from our membership as we were trying to refine what should be our top priorities in this weird COVID-laden session, right? And I remember back last summer, we were all hoping and expecting that all this would have abated by January and it would be in the rearview mirror and we'd be in post-COVID environment come the 21 session. That hasn't proven to exactly be the case, but the policy issues that have been sharpened by this crisis definitely go beyond just, we need to buy PPE, we need to fund our health departments. We need that too, but connectivity is super important. And I think everybody being on board has been really helpful for stuff we wanted policy wise, but having the funding to follow is going to help us live up to a lot of promises.
That's always been the piece, right? You need the money, and we know this is an issue in every single county. We don't need kids at McDonald's doing their homework because they don't have access to internet at their home. We need to fix that, and this is a joint effort now between the state and local governments to address this issue for sure. Michael, $300 million to, supporting critical lifelines for Marylanders, the temporary cash assistance program, stuff like that, really important too. You want to talk a little bit about that and why that's so essential as well?
Well, I think another thing we raised with Chris Trumbauer was equity considerations. And we know this pandemic has not landed upon different classes and different demographics of Marylanders equally. We know that's an issue with the trouble that's been caused. We know in the healthcare delivery system, there are weaknesses by class and by race. And we know that some of the economic effects have been hardest at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So if you're not thinking in terms of how can we help those who have been hit the hardest and probably have the most need anyway, then you haven't been paying attention. So this is Maryland, in my judgment, sort of correctly reading the room and recognizing there are some families who need immediate direct assistance above and beyond just I lost my job and I want some replacement income, but let's keep people from just falling off the ledger.
Right. That's a huge piece of the puzzle. I'm sure that's a non-negotiable here. And then $75 million, Michael, for apprenticeships and employment training. That's also going to be a major component of getting everybody on track. We know a lot of people have lost their jobs. We've talked about the role that our community colleges play in a lot of these job training programs. So really good to see $75 million for apprenticeships and employment training.
I think they couple together perfectly, right? We are refining and reshaping this economy on the fly and as we speak. And there's going to be a technology presence in our economic and personal activity that outlasts this pandemic. So be ready for it. And for some people, that's going to mean pick up a new skill, do some more training, go enroll in some classes at your community college, join up with an apprenticeship program that has you ready for the job that's ready for you.
Right.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah, we hear the term upskilling a lot, right? And I think that's going to be a big theme. And then, Michael, $100 million for supporting state employees that are on the front lines, including correctional officers, healthcare workers, police officers that could be exposed to COVID through their jobs, and then reinstating response pay for those folks as well. So that's a big deal. That's $100 million. And I think that's a good recognition from the state of their employees that have been on the front lines. And I think we'll probably see counties make investments as well, because we know that the Congress has also sent down money to counties. So of course that's on everybody's mind, but good for the state, for the governor and the presiding officers to come together and recognize the work that their employees on the front lines are doing throughout the pandemic.
I mean, we've had literally an hour or two to try and digest the basics of the state framework. So I don't think we can claim to be experts that, this number is right or this number should be larger or smaller. And I suspect there will be voices who show up and say, I wish there were more of this. They skipped that and that sort of thing. What I will say is this hits the tongue in a pretty good place. I think this sounds like a smart approach for a state like Maryland. It's the kinds of things that we would have guessed. I mean, if you and I and a dozen random listeners of the podcast had been issued index cards, what do you think is going to be in the plan for state use of ARPA funds? The list would look a lot like this, right? I mean, continue the stuff that we've been doing, double down on the problems we know have existed, we just haven't been able to tend to, look out for the neediest among us, and try and be ready for what's next. I mean, those are principles that they're not D or R, they're not urban or rural, they're just sensible. The kind of stuff, I mean, governor's really interested in using phrases like common sense. I mean, if he didn't use that in today's press conference, he should have, because this is a really common sense response to the situation we're in. And this is what I think the feds want and need state and local governments to do. Be smart on the ground.
We're lucky. We've had the state and local governments work really well together, including with CARES funding. Michael, we know some states are still, in arguments about how that money should have been directed. But this is also another example of the states working well, bipartisan fashion to get this done. Michael, moment of personal privilege. One of the things we've talked about, because of the pandemic, the governor vetoed a bill that would enhance disparity grant funding. This is funding for our poorest counties. They took a hit. Nobody wanted that to happen. The governor also included in this supplemental budget money to make them whole, to hold them harmless so that they're not losing disparity grant funded, which is much needed, especially in this pandemic. So I'm excited. I really thank the governor for recognizing the need to make sure that these counties are held harmless with disparity grants. So good news on that front too. But as you said, a lot to digest. We'll have to walk through the supplemental budget. I'm sure we'll go through the pages and pages, but this is a really big deal, I think, overall for the state of Maryland and for our budget moving forward.
Yeah. So a good plan, and what it also does for those of us who are stakeholders in the Maryland policy process is this avoids 2 straight weeks of rancor and panic about what the hell are we going to do? I don't think we're going to have that situation. This plan, has advanced sign off by the presiding officers of the House and Senate. They may do a nip tuck here and there and find a thing to adjust, but I think, this plan is going to more or less make it through the legislative budget process. You have to think, and don't wash out this issue with disparity grants as nothing. This is a major consequence for low wealth jurisdictions that have in good faith said, we'll raise local revenues. We're willing to have a tax rate to bring in these dollars. But if you don't get much bang for the buck out of your local income tax, the disparity grant is supposed to be the program that makes that work. And when that, when we basically had a record scratch moment where we skipped a year because of a fiscal veto in the throes of a pandemic, and it wouldn't have been fair to have this whole year get tossed out because of weird timing. So a hold harmless element in this provision. This is it's only $10 million in a $3.9 billion plan. So it's a rounding error.
Right.
But if you're Caroline County or if you're Prince George's County, it's a really big deal.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So again, that's a really good outcome here. And we'll go through the rest of this, Michael, and report back. But anything else before we wrap up today in this rainy Annapolis day here on Conduit Street?
I'm just happy to be back on Conduit Street, and no jokes about partying or crazy activities or anything like that. We're not doing all that sort of stuff.
Your lesson.
No, I'm not. I'm not trying to lead with that sort of thing. I have learned my lesson, so I still have my double mask right here. I'm being safe and responsible. Mom, if you're out there listening, everything's fine.
I can attest to that. So he's doing the right thing, but we'll leave it there today. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe. That way all these episodes will be sent to the device of your choice. You can also follow along on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then, of course, the Conduit Street blog. But for now, for Michael Sanderson, this is Kevin Kinnally signing off, and we will talk to you soon.